YOLO composing gloves here, and today we are checking out Expose by Mastering the Mix. It is a software where you can drag in your audio files, your music, and whatnot, and it will help you identify potential areas that could have possibly gone wrong. There are times when you're going to want to ignore the red because it doesn't matter for your situation, and there are times when you're going to want to take close attention to it and possibly go back and make adjustments to your mix or your master. So when we drag a file in, and you want to drag in a WAV file because waves are lossless files and they have all the information in your track. If you drag in something like an MP3, for example, here's an MP3 of The Cave. It will have different measurements sometimes, usually in the peaking, because this is a lossy file. It's missing a ton of information, and we can see that reflected here. The true peak and the peaking are much higher than in the WAV file, despite them being rendered out from the same DAW. So that is something to be aware of. Unless you plan on submitting MP3s, then I guess you should use the MP3 for your comparisons. But most of the time, we're submitting WAV files to places. So, okay, great. Now, when we have a file in here, we want to be careful about these measurements because they will change according to the preset. So we see down here, we have these presets. If we click, we have user presets, broadcasting. If you're doing that, you probably have more sophisticated tools if you're doing broadcasting, mastering, and mixing. Now, mixing, I don't use that often, but you can come in here and sort of reference your mixes. Most of the time, I want these measurements for the mastering side of things. And there's these different standards. So I'm going to do YouTube because I'm typically uploading to YouTube. YouTube has a set of standards, and if they ever change it, you're going to want to update the preset. If you click this cog icon up here, you can actually change all the settings in here along with, you can change your user presets to be what you want. That way you can keep things up to date. You click the cog icon to get rid of it. So let's go ahead and talk about what these things over here on the side mean and play back real fast. So you can click and hold anywhere and it will play it back. That's really great. Or once you've played on a track, you can just press spacebar and it will begin to play from wherever you had your cursor at. So if I were to come up here and click, we see that it becomes like a thick white line. And then if I push the spacebar, and some fun stuff begins to happen. So, okay. Let's go ahead and look at what these things are measurements. Because up here, for example, all this red, I can completely ignore. Or over here with the phase correlation, I can also completely ignore. So let's take a look at these. Now, the Cave, this first one is your integrated measurement and your short-term measurement. These are like big deals. I've used a lot of softwares that actually do similar things to Expose. And Expose does this wonderfully. It's so much faster because in other plugins, you have to play out the whole track. And when you do that, it will do what's called an integrated loudness unit measurement. You set up this thing to basically measure as the track plays. And when you drag it in here, since you don't have to do a playback, it can just analyze the track and tell you. This is often called the Loudness Target. And if you go on, like for for example, YouTube, they'll have a measurement that they want you to sort of be at. And if you're above or below that, they're going to change your stuff. So this is called the target loudness a lot of the time. You also have short term, which doesn't look at the entire track as a whole. It looks at like a moving segment of the track. So it's just like, oh, these 3 seconds and these 3 seconds and these 3 seconds. And so this tells you over short term. This is usually short term is like kind of like RMS. You can look at it, except for I typically am using my peaking meter, a peaking RMS meter or whatever. Well, peaking and an RMS meter in combination. So I typically don't care as much about short term as I do about integrated and what my dB is doing on true peak. So true peak is where the actual peak will occur. And there's a weird thing with Expose that I want to test out with some other softwares. But say, for example, up here, so it's saying I've got problems with peaking because my dB true peak is at negative 0.13. And I know that YouTube wants it at negative 1 dB true peak. That's just the standard they want it at. Well, up here, I know for a fact I had in my chain a FabFilter Pro L2 that had negative 1 on the dB true peak. And here it's saying it's negative 0.85. So this is the one area of the plugin that I'm a little skeptical of. If anyone else has an explanation, I went into how it actually gets this measurement, and it gets it at negative 6. It does it at 16 times oversampling, and it obtains the measurement. And that's really all the info it had. So I kind of want to go back and see if I had something weird in my chain. I don't know. I haven't done tests, but just so you know, so there's some weird things. I've noticed this with a lot of tracks. I don't know if it's the way it's reading it or if it's the plugins that I'm using. It's just a curious thing. So that would have to do more tests. It might not be a problem with expose at all. It might be something else entirely. But it's still pretty dang close, and it's worth being aware of because I'm cutting it really close to the line anyways. So, okay, that's what's going on there. Now, these are the peaking meter section, and you just basically want to make sure that you don't go above what they want you to be at, because otherwise you're just going to clip you down to what they expect you to be at. And that's never really a great thing. In cases like this, we see it's only at these very specific moments. So maybe it's just like how it obtained the measurement was a bit screwy, maybe every now and then. Because the thing is, this is a repeating loop. And over here. So this should have fired off in some other places and it didn't. So this is sort of like, I'm raising my eyebrow at this, just so you know. But there's still good ways of seeing like roughly where you're at. And I'm cutting it apparently right next to the line. So maybe YouTube will produce results like this as well and actually change my track. So I don't know. I did learn some things from it. Now over here we have our phase correlation meter in our stereo balance. And we see they're slightly different. Like this one is just a loop. So it's got a very narrow field because I mixed it that way. Where this one's a bit wider and this one's even wider yet. It's actually a little left-sided, I guess. And not terribly though. So this is just basically the width of your mix. I don't usually have problems with this. If you do, you're probably just using some unusual panning methods or something. So a lot of times left-right balance, you'll in the mix and the master, this should be deeply apparent. The thing that's really cool is the phase correlation meter. So we could see here, we have phase correlation. And if you're unaware what that is, basically when your left and right channel have different phases, they're going to sum either constructively or deconstructively. You can also see this on like a vector scope. And you want it to be positive because that means that they'll sum constructively. Like we see over here, it's like all positive, like almost 100%. Where over here, it's sort of a bit more skewed out. But if we go into the negative, like this one has a lot more on the negative values, that means you're doing weird stuff that will sound phasey when you sum it down to mono. But this track, I don't really care because this track is built around weird phasey sound design in the first place. Like, let's just listen to a couple problem areas. So there's that one. It's only like 1 split second. And it's a really weird sound there. So this is just a really fun, quirky kind of track. So I do not care about any of these red moments, even though the phase correlation meter is like, watch out. It's like, oh, don't worry too much here. I was doing this on purpose. So that's what the phase correlation meter is telling you about. Typically, if you do have something go off that you didn't mean to go off, you're probably using the Haas effect or some sort of delay effect that's causing phasey weirdness. And this can be a great red flag. It's also a common thing that pops up on forums with people who haven't done very much mixing. They'll say, hey, my vocals sound really weird and phasey when I play them over a phone, but they sound fine when I play them over speakers. Well, you probably use the Haas effect or something along those lines, and that's what's causing your phasey weirdness. Or you could have done stereo. If you were recording in stereo, you might have had a weird thing with your mics going on. There's a bunch of things that could be potential problems. Now, finally, on our last section here, this is a measurement of dynamic range. I typically don't have issues with this, but essentially, you see how this is like all soft, and then it gets like loud, and then we go back to soft again. So this is a large dynamic range. So it's saying, hey, we're chill with your dynamic range. Up here, it's saying your dynamic range is not chill. And you see it's like the same thing over and over and over because it's a loop. So because it's a loop, I don't care about this measurement very much. So even though there's a lot of red, it's sort of a non-issue. Like, I don't really care that much. Now, if you do have something in here that indicates something that you really want to go back and change, what you should do is you can't change it in here. You've got to go back into your DAW and look at the processes and the signal chains you were using. And depending on how complicated your signal chains were, this may be easier or harder to fix. For example, if you've got like left, right, you've got a weird balance issue you want to fix, probably just a couple pan knobs away from being a little more balanced, but then it's a taste thing. So you might not even want that. If you've got phase weirdness, you could go and look for plugins that possibly implement delays, or maybe you had a weird issue with plug-in delay compensation. That one's not very likely, but maybe something weird happened along the way that caused some phasey weirdness. For the peaking, now the peaking one's the most obvious. That's just levels. So on all of these, I've got issues where I just sort of did levels wherever I wanted. Now the cave is a special case where this was a track I pumped out in like 2 hours flat with a friend. So this one, of course, is going to be a little funky in some spots, and it's all in the drop. So I could probably go back and rebalance this and fix it up. I could also try just hard clipping it to whatever the standard is and see if I like that sound. Maybe I really like it. I don't know. Up here again, we got these 1 or 2 moments. These aren't too much of a big deal, so I might just leave those where they are. Now, if you have problems with the integrated loudness, generally you're going to have to rebalance an entire section of a song. So sometimes I shoot for the middle though, like -12 integrated, typically -14. Like you can see this one's at -12. And that's often between standards of multiple platforms if I want to make a master that'll work on like multiple places. But anyways, that is Expose. Now, there is a deal going on where you can get it for free with any purchase from pluginboutique.com. And I have an affiliate link below, which I think is super cool. Now, I have used a couple other softwares that do very similar things by other companies. I don't want to toss out names, but you can go ahead and look them up. Look up other softwares similar to this. I really like this one for its simplicity, like how fast you're able to get the measurements because it doesn't do it in real time. And it's kind of amusing how it turns red, like, ooh, be careful. I do want to just caution, just because something's red doesn't mean it's necessarily an issue. Your ears are the final guide, but at the same time, it's also worth doing some experiments, going back and seeing if you like the result more. This could be especially interesting if you start messing with the mixing. This is where I become a little more concerned if you're brand new and you're abiding by this like it's the law. Remember, your ears are the final guide. But anyways, that's that. Subscribe and have a blessed day.